Hi everyone, this is Matt from Dockerholics. Today I wanted to do a quick video about editing your Docker Compose using some alternative editors to maybe what you've been using in the past. There's lots of ways that you can do this, but I think there's a lot of value from using a good editor. So this is going to be a short presentation. We're going to touch on picking an editor, working with our compose files, whether they're kind of locally or remotely, and using a thing called a linter, right, which will potentially help in our workflow for picking up errors early on. So let's get on with it. This is very much a demo-driven presentation. The first thing to do is to choose an editor and install it. So there's lots of different options, whether it be Vi or Nano or whatever you're comfortable with, what you should use. But I think there's a lot of value from using a good editor. There's Sublime is nice, Brackets is great. I'm a big fan of Visual Studio Code. It's a free product. It's fully featured and functional out of the box kind of thing, and works great. So that's what I'm going to show you today. The first thing to do is open a browser, go to Google and type in get VS Code. Okay, and it should be the first link on the page. Will take you to the download page. It's available for Mac, Apple Silicon, Linux, Raspberry Pi, all sorts of things. I'm running Windows, so I picked the system installer 64-bit. I'm not going to run it now because I've already got it installed, but pick the option that suits you, your operating system, and get that installed. Once it's installed, you can run it, and you will get a window that looks a bit like this, or looks almost exactly like this. You might have a Getting Started tab open that puts a bit of additional information on your screen. You can just close that. So now we've got an editor that we can use for editing our YAML. So first of all, if you've got your YAML files locally, you can open them from the menu here. Now you can open individual files or you can open folders. I like to open folders because it means that all the files I'm working on for that project, all the folders underneath that again, are all accessible from the editor. I don't have to continually be saying open this, open that, etc. So I say open folder, and then in this case I've got a Docker folder which is on my C drive. Right, and if you open that folder and say select, you'll see all the subfolders underneath that, and you'll see your Docker Compose here and your environment file and anything else that you need. And then you can go ahead and just type things in here quite easily. A little tip which is really nice, if you want to comment a line out or a block of lines, you put your cursor on there and just hold down the control key and press dot. No, slash. Been using a different editor. So you can do that for single lines, or you can actually mark multiple lines and control slash, and it will toggle on and off the comments, which is really great. And that works for, if you're doing other programming languages, it'll put the appropriate comment for that language in as well. So that works kind of cross-platform for different things as well, which is really nice. The other thing I like to do with Visual Studio Code is go to File, Preferences, and Settings. And then in the search bar, type in Auto Space Save. Now, by default, it's set to off. I change it to after delay and usually 2 seconds. That means after 2 seconds of inactivity on the keyboard or mouse, it will automatically save those files. I just think that's a great feature. It means that you're always saving your work as you go, which is great. Visual Studio Code will kind of let you hook into source control repositories like GitHub and stuff like that as well. I'm not going to cover that in this video. That's a bigger topic, so I'll save that for another one. So we can just save that. One of the things that's nice in Visual Studio is most of the changes that you make in settings or anywhere else are immediately effective, so you don't have to go and reload things and stuff like that. So if we open the files from a folder, we can see them directly. If you were mapping a folder from a remote server, you would just go in and, I'll close this folder. You would just go in and say, same thing, you would say open folder, and you would find your drive share and map it. I'm not going to bother, it's just the same thing again. The other option that I really like is connecting to remote servers, generally Linux servers that have got SSH on them, and connecting over SSH to be able to access the files. And that's a great feature because it means that you're interacting with those files in a more secure means. You know, often when you can have drive shares and things like that open, they can provide an avenue for malware to kind of infect remote systems and things like that. So, you know, having SSH there just kind of abstracts that away. The other thing with SSH is it's good practice to use RSA keys and set them up with SSH. The nice thing about that, you're not going to be prompted continuously for passwords, and it's a whole lot more secure because only your machine or machines that have got registered keys can actually connect to that host. I'm not going to demo that here, but I really encourage you to look up setting up keys and passwordless connections with SSH. It's a really good feature. So we're just going to use standard SSH here. Within Visual Studio Code, you've got an option for extensions. Now, this is a way of adding additional features to Visual Studio Code, and there's literally thousands of them. If you click on the extensions, the one we want to install is called remote-SSH. And if you type that into the search bar at the top, right, you'll see this option here for remote SSH. We can click on that and read a little bit more about it. Don't really need to, and then we can say install. Now, this only takes a couple of seconds. That's done. We can close that tab, and we can close that extension window. Now, we can call that extension from Visual Studio Code to create a SSH connection for us. Now, you can do that by opening a thing called the command palette, which will let us call that. If you've got a view, you've got command palette there. After a while, you'll know that it's just Control-Shift-P to bring that same feature up. So from within here, if you type in remote SSH, and the option you want is connect current window to host. Right? If you pick any other kind of connections like this one or whatever, it'll actually open another Visual Studio window, which is just annoying. So click connect current window to host. And because we haven't set this up before, it'll ask us to configure what our SSH host is. And effectively, we're putting in what our SSH connection would be if we were kind of in a terminal or something like that. So it's SSH, and normally you would just put in SSH and the username at IP. I set up a demo for this on my Synology, and I don't like exposing port 22, which is the default port. So I changed that to port 222, just for an example. It just means it's not the default thing that people are looking for. If you're not using the default port, you have to add a -p space, whatever that port is. And then put in a username, if I can type it, and the IP of your machine. Okay. Once that's done, it asks you where you want to save your configuration. I just pick the first option here. And then once that's done, you say connect. Now, if you're not using the RSA key stuff, it will prompt you a few different times for passwords, generally just when you're first connecting or when you're opening a folder for the first time, and then after that, it shouldn't do that too often. Yeah, expect it to ask you a couple of times. So it'll prompt us here for a password, so we pop that in. This is our password to the remote box. And it might come up with this message here. You can just ignore that. That's not a big deal. And now we're connected to the machine. So now we can say open folder, and we can see here that we're on a Linux box now. I created some content here. I created a Docker folder that sits under my home directory. Where you store your Docker files, you know, we can talk about that in the forums, but You know, it really is, it's up to you. You know, generally on Synology, it's under volume 1/Docker. Linux boxes, people pick different places that they like. I generally stick it under my home directory. You know, Windows, it could be like C/Docker or something like that. It's as long as it's not kind of deep in a system folder or something like that, it's going to get locked out. You know, you can kind of pick where you like. So in this case, I created a Docker folder under there, and I'll pick OK. It'll probably prompt me one more time for the password. Yep. And now we're in. So in my Docker folder, I've just got a little example I put together. You can see in here I created a Docker compose file, which is creating an Nginx web server, basically. So it's just a basic web server that's going to host a web page. I created a .env file to pass some variables through for this and any subsequent ones that I want. And I created a Nginx folder, which is going to store our content that we want to have on our website once we create our Nginx container. So in here, I've got a index.html and I've got a CSS folder with a CSS file in there. That's just to kind of make the HTML slightly less boring. So that's just the persisted storage. So once we create our container, we can go into here on our Linux box into the Docker Nginx folder and change the HTML if we want to. Within Visual Studio Code, you've got a terminal that's already built in, so you don't have to be running PuTTY or any other Windows feed terminal. So you can go Terminal, New Terminal. Possibly it's also open already at the bottom here under Terminal. So if it's already open, you don't need to do that. So from here, we can actually see that we're in our the main folder that we connected to, and we can see our Nginx folder, our Docker Compose folder, and our .env folder. So from now we can just run our commands. So we can go docker-compose up-d to run in the background. We've only got the one container defined, so we don't have to specify the container. Ignore these messages. I've just got some other containers on this box, and Compose is just saying it doesn't know about them, but that's fine. So it's already pulled it down, so now it's creating it, or recreating it in that case, because I had an old one there, and it's done. So in our Compose, we set the port to be 3535. So if we go back to our web page, let me close that and open our browser again. And we go to, let me open that, okay. And we go to 192.168.1.135. That's my Docker server, and port 3535. There's our web server running, and it's styled from that CSS as well. Completely does nothing. It's really boring. It's just to illustrate quickly creating a container. One of the things I wanted to talk about, let's jump back to Visual Studio Code for a second. Let me close that and reopen that. One of the things about YAML that can be really frustrating, especially for people starting out, but to be honest, anyone, is that it's really important about the order and the indentation. So for instance, if you've got one character out of alignment like that, that's not going to work. And if you do a Docker Compose, it's going to spit out all of these kind of ordinal messages or index messages or just weird things that, to be honest, aren't that helpful, to be honest. So knowing about where your errors are potentially ahead of time can be really useful. In fact, knowing about your errors pretty much as soon as you make them is probably the most effective way of dealing with them. If you have to wait till you've kind of saved it and then gone off and run your compose file and then you get an error and then you have to go back and look for it, it's harder. But if you see the errors straight away, then it's a lot easier to manage them. So we do this with a thing called a linter, and a linter basically looks at our code here and runs a whole bunch of rules against it to determine whether there's any possible errors. If we go back to the extensions, and we type in YAML, the very first one that comes up is from Red Hat, right, which is fine. Now, if we install that, that's done, and we can close that and click there to close that. If we go back to our YAML now, and let's do that same error, straight away we see these red squiggly lines underneath saying that there's an error. Now, it may not tell you exactly, it might still spit out the bog standard kind of Docker error message, like incorrect type or expected string or something weird, but basically we know where the error is, and we can see here that's where it started. So we can go in here, fix that indentation issue, and the error's gone. Now linters will give you some false positives. They can be a little bit annoying sometimes, but more often than not, they add a lot of value. The nice thing about Visual Studio Code is, as you start using it, you can bring up IntelliSense. So, if you start typing something in like that and do a control space, you can see different things. Container, no. Yeah, so basically you can get IntelliSense coming up for different things. It doesn't work the greatest with YAML, but certainly the linting of errors is reasonable. So I recommend that anyway. So yeah, look, that's pretty much linters. So let's jump back to the end now. We're pretty much through this. So really, where we're at now is, I think you should pick an editor. I think there's a lot of value in that, certainly with the integrations, the source control that you get, and linting and auto-saving and just the visualization aspects of it. I think it's really useful. With a good editor, you can open files and folders remotely or locally. I think that remote SSH feature is a really good, secure way of managing your compose files remotely. And that's what I would kind of recommend to people. Using a linter, look, you don't have to use a linter, but I think, they're quite a good tool, generally speaking. And after a while, you'll kind of recognize where those false positives pop up and just ignore them anyway. But I think there's some value in that. So look, that brings us to the end. I hope that was useful, and I'll try to do some more videos once I actually figure out how to do this. It's all a little bit daunting at the moment, but once I figure it out, I plan to do some more videos to try and add some more value to the channel. All right, so thanks guys, and see you on Dockerholics.